All right, welcome back to the Ancient Wisdom series. Took a little bit of a pause, but I came back with one of the greatest gifts ever, which is Miss Danielle. Um, you probably know her as Danny Starr, but here she is, Miss Danielle. Thank you so much. Today's topic is a little different. We've talked about, ancient practices that we need to bring back into our modern lives. But today we're going to talk about the generational trauma that we didn't want, that kind of stuck with us through our literal DNA. So that is the topic for today, generational trauma. It's basically the inheritance of trauma from your mom, grandma, basically everyone before you. I'm not super well versed. That's why we have Miss Danielle with us. However, I do believe there's a little bit of confusion around the topic, that people think generational trauma is like you're in a house as a child and then there's some trauma happening within the house. So you're like experiencing it as a childhood trauma, but this is a little different. Am I right?
So yeah, so what you're referring to is childhood trauma, which okay, so it's a little bit connected and not connected, right? We have to look at when we think about trauma, it's so many different things, and it's such kind of that really popular word right now, right? It's trendy. Everyone's talking about trauma and unlearning and relearning things and different things like that. So when we talk about childhood trauma is the things you've experienced, the traumatic things you've experienced as a child in your child's stages in your childhood home, the things that you experience. When we're talking about generational trauma, we are talking about things that are literally written into your DNA that you couldn't control even if you wanted to, right? So as a child, we're exposed to a lot of different things. Now, here's the truth. Your childhood trauma absolutely can change your DNA, and it can be something you pass on generationally, but those two things are separate yet connected. So when we think about, when I think about my own childhood trauma, I recognize that generational trauma probably played a role in it, right? So they're connected, but again, not identical, if that makes sense.
Yes. And I think that's where some of the confusion comes in, um, because it's still fairly new, at least in the Western world, that trauma really is seeped into our DNA. And you can't always therapy it away.
No.
So, yeah. So, when would you say you had that moment where you were like, I think I might have some generational trauma that I need to work through?
So I had an aha moment a couple years ago. I didn't understand, I didn't know anything about generational trauma. I didn't understand chronic stress. I didn't understand those things, right? Um, I knew what my childhood looked like. I knew a little bit about the lives before me of my parents, but I didn't fully understand it. I was visiting my best friend in Brooklyn. No, we were in Philly at the time. She moves all around. She's a traveling nurse. So at the time we were in Philly, and she was like, I really want you to watch this TED Talk. And I was like, okay, cool. Like I'm always here for growth. So I'm like, let's watch the TED Talk. So she puts on a TED Talk by a phenomenal woman, a doctor named Nadine Burke Harris. Okay. Nadine Burke Harris is incredible. She has a book called The Deepest Well. If you have not read it, please do. And Nadine Burke Harris is commanding the stage. She is talking about trauma, and she is talking about our fight or flight response and the way that our bodies react to it. And she does the most beautiful thing that completely changed the trajectory of my life. Really, it's one of those moments where you're like, oh, damn, never going to be the same, going to
Hmm.
operate a little bit differently. And so she's explaining the way our body reacts when we are scared, frightened, in a moment of like panic, and we know that fight or flight, right? And she described it as fight, flight, or freeze. And she explains it, and she uses this beautiful analogy about, what if you're in the forest or the woods, or you're somewhere where a bear can jump out at you, right? She says, you're in this forest and you see a bear. Instantly, your body is going to react. You know to be scared of the bear. Your heart's going to start racing. You like instantly know something's got to happen. Am I going to run? Am I going to fight this bear? Or is my whole system going to completely malfunction and I'm just going to freeze? What's going to happen? But regardless, you see this bear and it is spiking your fight or flight response. And she goes, but eventually the bear goes away and your body calms down, right? And you get back to that homeostasis. And I mean, I'm all in at this point. I am like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God, this is so fascinating. And I was like, wow, like your body is magical. And then she says, but what happens if you live with the bear? Girl.
Oof.
And it was at that moment that everything connected for me. And I said, oh my God, what happens when you live with the bear? Now, this was pre becoming an educator. This was it's probably Nadine's fault that I was like, hey, you know what? Got to switch up everything. She was definitely a catalyst. But I literally remember that moment, and it took minutes. She kept talking. I kind of didn't hear much else of what she was saying because I was really focused on that bear analogy. And then I looked over at my best friend and I said, Claire. And she goes, yeah. And I go, I lived with the bear. And she goes, I know. And so from that point, I didn't know what that meant, but I knew it had like shocked my system into trying to figure out what exactly that meant, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
when she explained that analogy, I knew. I was like, wow, this is the way I learn. Her describing it in this storytelling way, this is the way I learned. It connected with me. And I was riveted. I was like, oh, okay, I need to know anything and everything that I can possibly know about this, right? So I started researching everything. I'm talking about, it's been about 5 years of just constant studying of trauma. You know how it's hard to focus on some things and then other things you're just completely hyper focused on,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
especially with the inattentive ADHD that I carry around so wonderfully. I hyper focused on the trauma, the generational trauma, understanding it. What does it look like? How? And so that was the moment for me that kind of woke me up to really wanting to understand how the people before me, how their experiences impacted me, whether I wanted them to or not. And so that allowed me to delve deeper into understanding my father better, understanding my mother better. Why is my mom the way that she is? And does that trickle down to me somehow? And is it possible to stop some of those trickle down effects? Because though I love my parents, I don't want all their shit, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
definitely don't want to pass their shit on to my kids, right? Because I already have
Which it
unlearned.
does, right? It's like seven. They say seven back, seven forward.
It
I
is.
don't
It.
know the exact number, but
I don't know the exact number either, but
yeah.
what I can tell you, one of the fascinating things that I realized during all of this. So we're talking about our genetics actually changing. So chronic stress changes your DNA, right? And so let's
Mm-hmm.
take it all the way back. I am one Black woman in America, just one, just me. But let's go back, right? So I'm going to try to get this right, but I decided to do some of the research of my history, right? I wanted to know, my grandpa on his dying bed, he was, on his deathbed, he's telling me about his grandmother coming through on the Underground Railroad. Now, this is a story I had never heard. So I'm like, you're going to wait till you're dying to drop this bomb about your grandma came through in the Underground Railroad. And it was very quick in passing. He talked about Canada and her coming through in the Underground Railroad. And I didn't know this story, but it stuck in my head. And I said, okay, this is one of those things you're going to have to research because this is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
So lo and behold, I jumped on ancestry.com and really did the work, went all the way through. Years ago, a white slave owner fell in love. I mean, I guess, call it love, call it whatever, but he did a nice thing. He clearly cared about this woman because he did take her to Canada to free her. She was pregnant with his baby. Okay. Um, Baby was born free. Mother was not. She was a slave who was freed by her slave owner partner, I guess. It's hard to I don't know what the relationship was. I know he
Mhm.
was a slave owner at one point and she was a slave, and I don't know how consensual that can be, but somehow it happened where he must have cared about her in some capacity because he stole her out and freed her in Canada. She was carrying his baby. That baby was born free. That baby, I believe's name was Capitola Lattimore. Capitola Lattimore was the mother of Pearl Hayden. Pearl Hayden was the mother of my grandfather, Gilbert Nevels. Now I might be missing one grandmother in there, so but it's a long history. But the point is,
It's not that long.
it's not that far, right? My grandfather's mother's mother was a slave who was freed, who gave birth to a free baby. And you have to understand what I've learned since all of this is that when a woman is born, she carries all the eggs, right? That she will
Mhm.
ever have, that she will ever ever from the time of like infancy, like all the eggs.
Yep.
So this would mean, and this was the part that was mind blowing to me. This would mean that my mother carried me, right? But she also carried my daughters.
Yep.
It means that my grandmother carried my mother and she carried me.
Yep.
So this means all of the trauma, all of the pain, all of the everything that my mom experienced, I got. But I wasn't just gifted all her trauma, I was gifted the trauma of her mother as well. Because from the time that all of us were born or even created as women, as that's hard to gender. So I'm trying to be politically correct and not misgender anything. But if we're talking about sex, okay, let's talk about sex, not gender.
Sex, yeah.
Yes, let's talk about sex, not gender. So when we're thinking of this, either way, my mom carried me and so did my grandma. And I inherited everything that they dealt with. Now let's think back to Capitola Lattimore, right? She was born free, but her mother was a slave. Her mother was a slave. Her mother did not have freedom. Her mother had to work her ass off. Her mother had to go through things that I can't even imagine. I want to believe that her slave owner was compassionate in some way that he freed her, but I can't fathom the relationship starting off consensual, right?
Yep.
Probably not. So then we're talking about rape. We're talking about lack of freedom. We're talking about all of these things that Capitola Lattimore's mother had to deal with. And despite the fact that she was freed by her slave owner and gave birth to a free baby, that free baby inherited slavery and the trauma of slavery and the trauma of rape and the trauma of all these things, which
Mhm.
so beautifully get passed down through generations,
Yep.
right? And so
Mhm.
when we think about some of these stereotypes, and I think one of the interesting things that I've learned in all of this is that first it was when I realized the egg thing, that you're born with all the eggs that you're going to carry, and
Mhm.
that I carried my daughters, but I've also carried my grandchildren already. Like what?
Yep.
What?
It's
It's mind
super
blowing.
mind-blowing.
And then I think about my own trauma, right?
Yeah.
And there's been a
Yeah.
lot of it. I think about my own trauma, and I think about how, through no fault of their own, my daughters have inherited that just because I'm their mom. And then how do we unlearn it? And what are the impacts and what does that mean? One, I think that we have to really understand how genetics work. And I don't even think I think they've studied for so long and they're just now figuring out certain things. So I
Oh,
think
yeah. We're
yeah,
just scratching the surface on this one.
just scratching the surface. But I think that there is so much to learn. And I do think that it is very possible to unlearn some things and to not pass some of those things on. I think about stereotypes. I think about, people talking about how Black people are afraid of dogs, right? And there's been this stereotype, this thing, but here it is, it's rooted in truth. Of course, Black people are going to be scared of dogs because dogs hunted Black people down when they were slaves. And you have that genetically, that fear of dogs, right?
Programmed.
It is programmed in your genetics. It's not that you're just scared of dog, and people laugh. Sometimes you see someone and they're scared of this tiny dog. And you're like, it's a baby. But what you're
Mhm.
seeing is what you're seeing directly in front of you. You're not seeing this person's great great grandmother or a great great grandfather literally being chased down in the middle of the night by dogs that were trained to bring them back, to kill them, to attack them.
And
So
that's the bear, right?
that's the bear. You're living with the bear, right? And so the bear exists in so many of us, and we don't even realize it because, like we said, we're just scratching the surface of what generational trauma really is. And so for me, it comes down to understanding it. And I still don't have a complete grasp of it. It's something that I literally spend a lot of time researching, trying to educate myself on it, especially as an educator, right? Because now I'm dealing with students. And when I see how their trauma is manifesting, I know that it's not just theirs, it's their
Mhm.
mothers and their fathers and their grandparents, right? And so now you got all this trauma that you inherited, and we're supposed to just expect you to act right? How? When you were born into all of this trauma?
No, you can't even process it because it's not your own.
It's not yours. You don't even
And
know
then
it's
it's a
there.
child, so.
And you don't know it's there. And why
Mhm.
would you? Why would you assume? Why would I assume that Capitola Lattimore, her issues, and her mom, who was very much connected to me, but why would I assume that because my great grandmother was a slave, that is going to impact me so deeply? But it does.
Yeah.
It definitely does.
Mhm.
And so for me, I guess the process is understanding it first, because I always need to know the why. Why? I need to know the whys. So understanding the whys, and then how can I spare my children? And if I can't spare my children, right? Because my children have already experienced, they were already gifted my own trauma. How do I teach my children to handle their trauma in a way that it is not gifted to their grandchildren also? And how do we break these cycles? And how do we learn and unlearn these things so that way generations from now
Mhm.
aren't impacted by Capitola Lattimore, right?
Right.
And so that is where I am now. And I don't have it figured out. That's for sure. I don't have it figured out, but I'm intentional about understanding it better. And I'm intentional about maybe I'm not going to see all of my efforts work out for me. And I'm okay with that because listen, we're talking about a lineage. We're talking about years and years and years of trauma. I can't fix it all. But when I heal myself, I actually am healing my lineage.
Mhm.
You know, I am healing my lineage. And when I heal myself, I am healing my grandchildren that don't even exist yet. But I'm
Right.
absolutely healing my grandchildren because when I heal myself, I'm not passing it all on.
Yeah.
Right. And so now it's teaching my children how to cope in the best of ways. It's teaching them how to ground themselves, how to not let their trauma become etched in their DNA. It's going to hit you. We're all going to be traumatized. We live in this world. We live in America. We're going to be traumatized. But it's about not letting it etch itself into the DNA, because when it does that, no matter what we do, it's passed on. And
Mhm.
the other piece of it is, now that we know so much of our trauma is passed on, prioritizing healing, or you're just going to be hurting people all over the place.
Yep.
And so that's where I am now. I'm in this position where I'm really, really studying generational trauma. I've even switched my master's into social work because I'm already an educator and I want to educate people. But what is most important to me right now? It's educating people on how to. We're not free if we are still chained up to the trauma of our ancestors.
Mhm.
And how could we ever be free? We don't even understand the trauma that is a part of us, right? And so
Right.
now it's really, really understanding it, really working hard to break it, to figure out a way to. You can appreciate somebody's story and somebody's fight. I appreciate the fact that Capitola Lattimore survived some craziness. I can appreciate that. She should have never had to. I get that. I can name all those things and also not want that pain to exist in my body.
Oh, for sure.
I can appreciate the fact that she went through some crazy, awful things and not want those things to be gifted to my children. Now we can tell
Mhm.
those stories, right? I want to tell them the stories. I want to tell them what she went through without it physically changing their DNA and
Yes.
giving it to my grandchildren. And I think there has to be a way. And I don't have all the answers yet, but I know that the start of the answer is talking about it, understanding that when we are harming our children, we are actually harming all the children that are going to come after them, right? And so for me, it's being an educator, and it's pouring into the parents, not just my kids, because the parents are just as hurt as the kids.
Yep.
Right? They are wounded children who just turned out to be adults.
Mm-hmm.
Wounded children grow up to be hurt ass adults.
Oh, yeah, they do.
They do. And it all starts with that, right? And so
Yeah.
then we think about these babies who are born into slavery, raised in slavery, had their own children within slavery, passing it on to people like me who can go 3 generations back and realize that my great grandmother was a slave.
Mm-hmm. And even without, let's say you never heard that story,
It still exists inside me.
That bear is still there. And maybe the story helps you like with like a roadmap.
Yeah.
An understanding, but there's so many people who don't have that story.
Yep. And you just don't know what
Mhm.
you're fighting or what you're up against.
Exactly.
And so question, why am I like this? Why can't I focus? Why can't I focus? You can't focus because the way that trauma manifests is to protect your brain, and your brain protecting itself doesn't want you to focus.
Right.
And when we think about diagnosing all these babies, especially Black and brown babies with things like ADHD and ADD and all these things, the root cause of it is trauma.
Yes.
Right? And so it's really understanding all of these things and then deciding, now that I understand it and now that I know better, how do I do better? And so that's kind of where I am. It's like, now that I know better and I understand this, how can I, and it is not an easy process. Nina, I got to tell you, some days I'm yelling at my kids and I know I'm just added to the generational trauma, and I'm like, damn it, but I have to unlearn these things.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part of it is when we think about trauma, not all of it was, so I got whoopings as a kid, right? But where did that come from? It came from the fact that this is the whole thing of understanding where you come from, right? You don't have to stay there. You don't have to be stuck there.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you understand things. I choose not to put my hands on my kids, right? Because I know better, because I research. It's hard sometimes because sometimes I think, hey, I turned out okay. And I got my ass.
Mm-hmm.
But when you know better, you try to do better. But I think about all the people I've heard about, oh, they just beat their kids, or they do this, or they beat their wives, or this and this and this. And they don't ask the why before the why. And the why before the why is there so much domestic violence? Why is there so much child abuse? I'll tell you why. Because when people were slaves, they wanted their wives and their children to survive. So what did they do? They beat them into obedience because they knew, listen, if you act up, you're going to die, right? Slaves were being beaten by their owners. Why? Because they wanted them to fear their owners. They wanted them to not be able to go anywhere. So they literally beat them to submission.
Mm-hmm.
That is passed down. It's not that my parents were like, I'm just going to beat the hell out of my kids. My parents legitimately had it encrypted in their DNA that in order for your kids to survive, you have to make sure they're obedient. You have to make sure they're following the rules. And my parents didn't question it. They weren't like, hey, why am I doing this? It was so etched in their genes, their DNA of, hey, my mom did this, my grandma did this, everybody before them did this, but why were they doing it? Survival. Well, I don't have to beat my kids to survive anymore. And my kids don't need to be beaten we're not in slavery anymore, but it's literally so encrypted in our DNA that it's such a natural response to do it. And again, it all circles back to, now I've become the damn bear, right? Now I'm the bear. Yeah. So it's not even that I was living with the bear. It's that I lived with the bear passed on its bear tendencies to me. And now I built my own damn house and I become the bear.
You become the bear.
It's a vicious cycle of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. And that's what generational trauma is. It is a vicious cycle of oppression. And if we don't put it on the forefront and we don't prioritize understanding it better, and we don't prioritize funding and educational things to get in schools, it's not going to matter if we don't start abolishing the systems of oppression
Mm-hmm.
that continue to keep us bears,
Yeah.
that reinforce us becoming these bears, right? And it looks like survival sometimes, but it's really oppression.
Yeah. And the system doesn't know the difference between a real and perceived threat. So whether there's the physical bear there or the perception of the bear, our bodies don't know.
It
And
reacts
so it reacts the same. Um, when I was looking up, some info about generational trauma earlier, and things like hypervigilance, trouble focusing, anxiety, low
depression.
self-esteem, depression, and I'm sure, as you know, certain populations and certain communities
Mhm.
have higher rates of this generational trauma.
Of course, and it would make
Um,
sense because of history, right?
yep,
And
poverty,
yep,
Black people in
poverty,
America.
mhm,
Mhm.
all of it. And that hyper vigilance is so real. From the time that I can remember, like literally since my first memories, I have always been hyper vigilant. I have sat facing exits. I have, even now when I get in any Uber, when I'm anywhere, I instantly send a text message that goes to about 4 different people to say where I am, what am I doing? I didn't date. I literally liked the people that I am marrying are the people I looked at and was like, okay, they'll be good life partners. I didn't date. I was too afraid to date. I was afraid of my safety all the time. All the time. Legitimately afraid of my safety all the time. And I didn't understand it. I was like, what? Why am I always scared?
Now you know.
Generational trauma. I'm scared because Capitola Lattimore was scared. I'm scared because Pearl Hayden was scared. And chronic stress is passed down.
Oh my gosh, that is cellular. Mhm.
On a cellular level, it's passed down. It's also why people are dying so young. I
Yeah.
think about my dad. My dad died at 53 years old. His brother died in his late 40s. And you can
Just
look
got
at it.
the chills.
I know. And you can look at it and you can say, well, he was an alcoholic. He was. And so was my uncle. But why? Maybe because my grandmother was 12 and 13 when she had my dad and my uncle. So my dad and my uncle were raised by a 12 and 13-year-old little girl in Compton and Carson, California. So you're being raised by a 12 and 13-year-old little girl. That's trauma right there.
Jesus, yeah.
In Compton and Carson, California, trauma. And then because you're raised by a child who doesn't know how to raise children, the amount of trauma you've witnessed just in general by being raised by a child and then being raised where you're being raised, it is no wonder my dad, by the way, my grandma also died in her 50s. So my grandma dies in her 50s, gives birth to 2 baby boys who die in their early 50s and late 40s. And it's all trauma. And they're all addicts. And why are they all addicts? Because of trauma. You have people who haven't even fully, like in their lives, they haven't really, in their lives, they're like, I have a good life. Like, why am I addicted to this stuff? Like, why do I do these drugs? Why am I showing up like this? I went to a good school. I did this. I did that. Yeah, but your grandma was a slave.
Yeah.
And you're carrying her trauma and you don't even recognize it. So now that is flowing through your veins, your blood, and you don't understand how to deal with it because you don't even understand it. So now you're starting to do crack and cocaine. And now you're 48 and you die because you don't even understand. And my dad, 53, drank himself into an oblivion. Why? Because he didn't understand his trauma, never was able to deal with his trauma. And I think that is the biggest thing for me. It's looking at my uncle, looking at my dad, and looking at my grandma. I can't even imagine the life my grandma led. She had a baby at 12 and 13. I was 26, gainfully employed, married. I owned a house at 26 years old, and it was the hardest shit I ever did. She was 12 years old in Carson and Compton, California. How? It's no wonder that she died in her 50s.
I mean, not to be crude, but 12 to the 50s with that kind of, that's like a huge span of time.
Yeah.
To be dealing with this trauma, you know? So, wow.
And she beat the hell out of them because, of course, she was 12 and 13. She had to beat the hell out of them. And in
She was
return,
probably still getting whooped herself.
at 12 and 13, exactly. So then she passes that trauma on to my dad. And my dad does what he knows, because it's the only thing he knows, is to beat his kid's ass because he wants to protect us. He's not beating us because he doesn't like us. He's beating us because he loves us, which doesn't make any sense now. But he's beating the shit out of us because he loves us and because he thinks this is the only way to protect my kids. And it's only because of how much research I've done and how much understanding of this that I've done, and I still don't understand half of it, that I have come to really understand my dad and understand how hurt he was and the life he lived. And, you know, when I think about my dad now, I don't actually mourn his death because I've found peace in his death. He is so free. I literally mourn his life more than anything because I can't imagine what he went through. And then when I mourn his life, I really mourn my grandma's life. And when she was alive, you know, I just thought, like, what a shitty mom, you know?
Yeah.
And it's a perspective is everything. She was not a shitty mom. She was very much gifted shitty circumstances.
For
And
sure.
so I am trying to heal my lineage for my grandmother, for my dad and my uncle, for my grandchildren that aren't here yet, and just like really trying to understand. Genetics are a trip. People say it all the time. And we are so connected to the people that came before us, more than people could possibly understand.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, people aren't really trying to understand it all that much. And so my urge and my push to everyone is to really figure out where you came from. And it might not be pretty, but it might explain a lot about who you are as a person and why you are the way that you are. And things that you discover will change the trajectory of your life. And if you're committed to healing and you're committed to like breaking those generational curses and you're really, really intentional, you won't have to pass on all that trauma to your grandchildren. Your kids might not be so lucky because we are just figuring this out now. My kids are going to experience some stuff, but they're also going to have better tools than I had.
But I mean, even the awareness you have, that already major shifts, you know, that's always the first step in any like major transformations, is that awareness. And I've seen you do the volcano breaths with the girls, like
since they've been babies.
That right there just slows down the nervous system. It's healing, you know, things like that, you know, you think are just like, oh, calm down, you're having a moment. It's actually healing them down to their cells. So
it absolutely is. And I'm going to keep it up, you know, and I'm not doing it perfect. I recognize my missteps every day, but I am committed. And that's and I don't give up. When I falter or I have a misstep, I'm not like, well, let's throw it all out the window. I'm like, listen, this isn't just for me. It's not. This is not, it's not just for me. If my dad had to die at 53 and my grandma had to die in her 50s and my uncle had to die at, like in his late 40s, somebody's got to stop it.
Yeah.
You know, that's a lot to put on one person, but it's worth it. And I'm willing to do the work because the work is not going to just impact me. It is going to impact generations. Just like all the trauma has impacted generations, all of the healing can too.
Oh, yes.
You don't
What
have
a
to
fresh start.
You don't have to just pass on trauma. How about we pass on the healing? How about we pass on the wisdom, right? But so often negative outshines positive. So often the trauma is the focus rather than healing. And so I'm going to shift my focus. My focus isn't, I recognize there's been a shit ton of trauma. We've gone through so much. I know I've seen it. I feel it in my soul. I know what's back there. In fact, when I started the ancestry.com thing, I remember my dad saying, if I were you, I'd stop. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I remember him saying, like, you're not going to like what you find. I remember him saying that. And I remember being angry at him, like, well, like, forget you. Like, what do you mean? Like, I want to know where it came from. But he was like, you're not going to like it. And he was right, but you can't hide from it, right? Because it's already there. It exists within me. So yeah, I wasn't happy. You know, I wasn't happy at all with that. But I'm not going to live with it. I'm going to, I'm going to make that a priority. If everything else, if nothing else, healing is the priority for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. And, even for people who maybe in this lifetime, they've had a trauma-free
Yep.
physical life, they're always like, oh, like, I don't need healing. I don't need healing. Everyone is in need of healing for this exact reason.
Everybody. It is. It's
right
like
there. You
maybe
don't know what was
you don't
going
know.
on before.
You don't know. You don't know, and we are so connected to the people that came before us. And when we think about genetics, it is mind-blowing when people meet people that they've never been a part of. You don't even, with 23andMe and all these different things, you're meeting people that you had no idea you were related to. And then you spend 24 hours with them and you realize, holy hell, we are the same person. And you never spent a day with them. Not one day with these people. And you're exactly alike. Genetics are pivotal to understanding humanity.
Yeah.
They talk about nature versus nurture, and we see all these different things. And yes, obviously, nurture plays a major role, right? But holy hell, the things we are passing on to each other.
That nature. Yeah.
Food.
It's crazy. It's like foods that our moms ate.
Yep.
Before we were ever conceived.
Della, my youngest, she should turn into a French fry because that is, and thank God she can eat it, right? Because she's got all these different, I have a chronically sick kid, so she's got all these different things that she can and cannot eat. But I remember specifically only eating French fries because I was so sick during my pregnancies. There were only a couple different foods that I could eat while I was pregnant because I was just so sick all the time. And I would take a detour on my way in. I was working in radio at the time, and I would take a detour in and go through a drive-through every single morning and get either hash browns or a French fry because it was the only thing that would sit in my stomach. I could stomach it without getting sick in the morning. And if I didn't get it, I was sick every morning. So every single morning I would run through the drive-through and I would get a couple hash browns or I would get some French fries. When I tell you this child could turn into a French fry, it's mind-blowing to me, right? And here's the other part of it. The other one can't stand French fries. And I was so sick. I love French fries more than anything. And I would eat French fries and just get so sick with them.
Oh my God.
So my oldest, I was eating French fries. I'm telling you, like, it's all connected.
Yes.
There are so many things that we're not aware of and we're learning, and I'm not an expert by any means, but I'm really, really studying. I'm going to become an expert in generational trauma. I'm going to do it for me, for you, for our kids, for everybody's kid. Like, it's so important. And so I'm going to put in the work and do it. But I'm mind blown every day by the things that I'm discovering and just how much even people I've never met in my life, never met. I don't know anything about Capitola Lattimore, but I know that her trauma is easily running through my veins.
Oh yeah.
It's just, it's becoming aware and committing to healing. That's all. That's what it comes down to, the commitment to healing. And healing is not always pretty. It is also not always linear. So you just got to push through and you got to heal. That is
a lot of detoxing that comes with healing.
Oh my gosh. I know.
A lot of shining the light on those dark cave-ish areas in there.
It's taking a break to sleep.
Yeah.
Because healing is sleep. It is literally, sometimes I sleep so much and people are like what? And my partner, Jeff, is always like, babe, you got to get up. You got to get up. And I was like, I am healing. I don't think you understand what healing looks like. Sometimes healing is me spending 24 hours in this bed because I'm healing generations here.
Yeah.
I am healing slaves. I am healing the people who came before me. I am doing all these things and I have to do it. And sometimes healing just looks like sleeping.
The most restorative time,
Yeah, it really does. I love these conversations. They give me faith and like hope that people are going to do the work. Because you have to do the work. You have to do the work.
What does the work look like for you outside of yourself? Like seeking help outside of your research?
It looks like therapy. It looks like investigating my triggers. Why am I reacting this way? It is checking my ego, because your ego will have you respond real quick because of hurt you didn't even know you experienced, because you didn't. Somebody else in your gene pool experienced it, but gifted it to you. So it's really, really being investigating my triggers, investigating it. Like, why am I responding this way?
Mm-hmm.
Why does this bother me? It's being very mindful of the way I'm showing up in certain situations, and it's slowing down. I think because I have had that fight or flight and that chronic stress my entire life, I haven't always known how to exist in peace. Peace is scary when all you know is trauma. When your body finally starts to calm down and all you've ever known is fight or flight, that is scarier than the fight or flight you've been experiencing your whole life, because your body doesn't know how to deal with calm.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's learning to breathe in the calm moments that kind of scare me a little bit. Why do I feel this good? Imagine asking yourself, why do I feel this good? Isn't that an awful thing? Like, to be like, why do I feel this good?
Like, that's weird. I shouldn't feel good.
You're so used to not feeling good, and you're so used to, that's your homeostasis is literally trauma.
Right. So anything that deviates from that is like, hold up.
Yeah.
Something's not right here.
I started practicing calling my therapist even when everything is good.
Cool.
I did. I started calling my therapist and say, like, when I would message her, like, hey, can we check in? She'd be like, is everything okay? I'd be like, actually, everything is good, but I want to talk about the good things.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we are hyper focused on the bad things.
Yeah.
But, and that makes sense, because in order to heal, we have to do those things, but also really taking time to live in that peaceful moment, right? I've spent so much time trying to understand my trauma and trying to work through it and deal with it, that peace was just not something I understood.
Mm-hmm.
Calm and slowing down were not a part of who I am, who I was. And so I think for me, it looks like slowing down, like and I am a fast-paced person. So slowing down has been such a part of my healing journey. It is questioning everything. Why do you feel this way, Danielle? Does this belong to you, or is this somebody else's?
Key.
Why are you reacting this way? And that is hard to check yourself.
Yes.
and to humble yourself in those moments, to be like, wait a minute, why am I, and so that has been really key for me, is just like understanding the way that my trauma does manifest, and my coping mechanisms and the way that I try to protect myself isn't always the healthiest of ways. And so then it's in those moments where I am triggered, stopping and saying, you know what, I need to process for a second. And that has been really helpful for me. It's walking away instead of having that reaction.
Mm-hmm.
It's naming, I know that something is happening right now, because I can feel it on a physical level. Like, I can tell I am heightened right now. I don't even know why, but something is there. I am triggered, and I'm going to walk away from this and try to process this, because I'm not even sure this is mine, but it's in there and I'm feeling it. So I think that the pausing for reflection has been key to my healing. And I think that the biggest thing has been slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're constantly in fight or flight, all you know is to rush to safety, rush to safety, rush to safety. Sometimes safety really is just slowing down. It's slowing down in naming what you're feeling, understanding what you're feeling, and then deciding, do I even want to feel this? Is this even mine?
Mm-hmm.
Can I let this one go? Is it worth fighting for? Is it worth the feelings that I'm feeling? And sometimes it is. Sometimes it absolutely is. And you have to fight through that and work through it and fix it. And sometimes it's like, oh, this might be Capitola Lattimore's. This ain't for me. Like,
right.
I'm sending her love, and I am so sorry that she went through that. I am not her. And I'm going to love her and love the younger versions of myself that felt all her pain without knowing it.
Yeah.
And also, that's not mine.
That is not mine.
That is not mine. And so learning how to differentiate what belongs to me, what belongs to others, and what belongs to society. Because so
It's a
much.
whole other form of trauma right there.
Exactly. So that's where I've been really focused on, is that slowing down piece.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been really helpful.
Yeah, that's huge. And for people who don't know their story, don't exactly know their lineage, doing that exact thing, just pausing to not only ask yourself why certain things trigger you or why you react certain ways, but really checking in with yourself and seeing like, does this resonate with me? Does it
Yeah.
feel like it's mine? Does it feel like it was put onto me?
I
You'll
would
know the
question
answer.
everything, because
Mm-hmm.
since the time that we were born, not only are we given the stuff of, generations before us, but then societal views are pushed on.
Oh, yeah.
So you're just so confused. You have no idea who you
We
are.
don't know who we are. I mean, it's in
Oh,
there. We forget. The only time I think we ever know is like when we're infants, but we can't really
or on our
remember.
deathbed when we go back to it.
Oh, yeah.
I think
Mm-hmm.
I think it's that beginning of life and that end of life. I remember, I remember specifically like my grandpa, when kind of that filter came off. Like, at the end of life, all of a sudden there's this moment where I don't know if it's clarity. Some people think it's delusional, right? I don't think
Mm-hmm.
so.
No, I don't think so either.
I think
The
that
veils are lifted.
I think we're given a filter that we're supposed to kind of abide by. And at the end of life, you're kind of like, I ain't abiding by nothing. I live this life. I'm gone. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember the moment that kind of veil came off my grandpa, and he was saying all types of stuff. And I remember thinking, oh, this is my papa right here.
Right.
I'm learning some things, and then I remember feeling sad a little bit and thinking, dang, he's like 78 years old and he's just fine. Like he's just letting it all
Just
out.
fine. Like, yeah.
Yeah. And I hold on to that because I don't want to be 77 and being like, okay, is this really who I am? Who am I? You know? So now it's like everything, question and I even teach the girls, they're 6 and 9. And every day I'm like, who told you that? Why do you believe that? Question everything. Where does it come from? Where does it come
Yes.
from? Why do you believe that? Who told you that?
Start them young.
And sometimes I'm even like, literally, we're talking, and then I find myself saying something, and I have to stop myself and go, you know what? Let me go look this one up, because I'm not so sure I even believe this right now, and so
Yeah.
it's really being, look, you got to put on your Inspector Gadget hat in life, and you have to literally investigate everything. Nothing should be, I mean, a fact is a fact, but even facts can be presented in deceitful ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to be vigilant in your investigating, not in your fear. Your fear is something that is going to hinder you, but you can investigate everything thrown at you to just decide, am I rocking with this one or am I not? Because I don't have to.
You're right. That's the thing. Not everything
No.
has to have your full attention or energy or mental capacity or anything like that.
It's got to be like, am I aligned with this?
Mm-hmm.
Connect to who I am. And then if you
Yeah.
can't figure it out, that means that you've strayed so far from who you really are that you got to do some backtracking.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. And I think there's a huge returning and remembering collectively going on right now. And it's ugly. There's like a lot of like, I'm depressed because I hate my job. And, I'm like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. And before, who was really talking about purpose? It was just like,
I got to
oh,
work.
you work and that's it. But now it's like, it's darkness because it's trying to get to that light, but we cannot get there without shedding these layers first. So
Yeah, I used to hate snakes, and then I read this article about snakes and like them shedding and becoming like new versions of themselves, and I'm like, huh. When you look at it from a different perspective, sometimes you just got to shed some of that. You got to when you live in this society, from the time that you're in pre-K, you're constantly being indoctrinated with things that don't belong to you and were created by old ass white men from years ago that were still following books that were written years ago, where there's been like little amendments but nothing like radically shifted. And so it's like, this is what we're doing, where everything changes except for the Declaration of Independence. Everything changed. Everything. What we know in this world is that everything shifts,
Yeah.
except for everything the country is built on.
Yep.
Confusing. So I would just say
Super.
question everything and find your own peace, and then
Yeah.
remember that when you're healing, it's not just you. You're healing so many things, so many people,
Mm-hmm.
so many experiences, and really root yourself in your own healing, but have pride in the fact that your healing is going to benefit generations, both
Right.
before you and after you.
This is collective, and it's easy to fall into that individualistic mindset where, oh, I feel horrible all the time, it doesn't impact anyone else, or as long as I'm feeling good, that's all that matters. But you know, there's a balance between honoring ourselves, listening to what resonates, and understanding that there are ripple effects that come with it. So
Ah,
thank you for coming on here.
of course, thank you for having these conversations with me. Every time I do something like this, I always it reminds me, it gives me hope. That's all. It gives me hope because everybody doesn't have conversations like this, and everybody's not concerned about healing themselves or their generations or things like that. So this really gives me hope, and I appreciate you allowing me the space to share. And you know, I'm not. One day I will be a complete expert in this field, but it's really nice to be able to share. So, like, I mean, I've been researching this stuff for 5 years.
Right.
I've been intentional about it, but there's so much more to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so nice to be able to share and to encourage people and to remind people like we're all still learning, and there's going to be new information that comes out, and just be aware, just be aware, be mindful, and be intentional about the things that you do and the things you're intaking, because again, you can traumatize yourself too.
Oh, we hurt our own feelings so bad.
Oh my goodness. Like, why do I set myself up like this? Oh, but anyway, all that to say, heal, prioritize your healing, because when you heal yourself, you are healing so many people before you and after you. And I think that is the key. I really do.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So thank you so much.
Yes.
Behind you, we see your book cover. So anyone on here, she wrote this amazing book called Empathy and Eyebrows. I'll link her pages and stuff in the description. So please support. You won't regret it. Also, little Miss Della, who she mentioned, her baby, she's healing.
She is healing. We've changed that. We've changed everything. And we used to be like, she's a sick kiddo. She's a sick kiddo. And then I started to realize, like, there are power in words. We know this. She is healing every day.
Yes.
Healing. That's what we're doing. We're pushing towards healing. So
she's healing, but in her healing requires lots and lots of
time,
financial time, all that. So I will also link the GoFundMe if you have it in you to either donate or pass it on. That would be awesome. So thank you again for being on here.
I love
really appreciate you, and I love you too.
Thank you. I'm going to see you soon because I need to get everything back together again. Okay. Love you, boo.
Love you.
Bye.
See you.